Did he tell you when?
Hello! Hello everybody! Welcome to the graduate conference. It's a split conference between history and classics and music. Music being Ncounters and the history and classics side being the middle ground. So it's wonderful to see everybody here. It's great that when disciplines step out of their own box and actually learn to say hi to people other than their own colleagues. God knows it doesn't happen very often in graduate programs. I know we all tend to, just hide inside our little caves and try to sound smart to each other. But it's nice that we're all able to get together, drink some beer, talk about things that we love to do. And this is going to be the place to do it. So to kick off the conference, we're going to have a little talk from MacDonald and Rylan here. You guys are doing a joint thing, am I correct? Yeah. That's right. And I'm not going to bore you with my awful speech, and just let these guys get right to it. So, welcome.
Can everybody hear me all right like this? I'm trying to use a microphone. I'm fine, yeah, I prefer it.
You really don't like microphones?
No, I really don't. It gets between me and everybody else. Our presentation of, I'm MacDonald. I'm a postdoctoral fellow in the music department. My, I guess, official title is postdoctoral fellow in Canadian folk music, although I'm not talking about Canadian folk music tonight at all. Rylan and I have been working on a paper for the last couple of months that looks at protest from a couple of different points of view. We realize that our work, since we've known each other over the last year and a bit, our work often kind of coincides and overlaps and influences one another, both because I'm an instructor of pop music, as many of you know, and I get an opportunity to think and look at music across a whole bunch of different genres. And one of the things that's most interesting me lately is the way in which dissent seems to be a very difficult concept to talk about from a musician's point of view. Partly because the idea of dissent crosses over a variety of musical genres, shows up in different musical genres in different periods, and then kind of moves on and shows up in other places. So what we're going to be looking at tonight, to reflect on the theme of the Graduate Music Conference, the Audible Past, the Mutable Future, is to think about dissent from dissent in music, and particularly the sound of dissent. So we came up with the title, Rylan came up with the title, Who Said You Could Label Dissent? What we're interested in. So that was Rylan's piece for the evening.
Keep going.
Okay. The Audible Past, we're interested in actually looking at that very explicitly, the sound of the past in recordings. The Mutable Future, thinking about the ways in which this sound of dissent and sound of protest showing up in different musical forms, beginning in what we now call folk music and being most explicit in what we now discuss as punk music or even rock music. Those conversations don't happen in typical music history. There is no discourse of dissent that allows somebody in talking about music to stitch together Woody Guthrie as a folk musician to the punk music, to the punk movement. But what we're going to argue tonight as well is that Woody Guthrie, and more completely on Tuesday at another presentation we're doing, more completely that Woody Guthrie should perhaps be considered outside of folk music. So instead of being the guy that, the forerunner of the folk revival and then the figure of folk music, period, maybe Woody Guthrie should more kind of accurately be considered in terms of the development of punk music, and perhaps in extension the development of rock music. But I want to begin on more of a personal note. In 2006, 2007, at the Vancouver Folk Music Festival, I got a chance to interview a guy by the name of Utah Phillips. And Utah was an IWW, International Workers of the World, songwriter. He was a union member. He worked. He was a hobo for tons of years. He came back from the Korean War, messed up, really feeling that he wasn't able to really commit full time to daily life in the way that we may expect. He was messed up in a way that required time, therapy, required support, and he just didn't get it. He found it in alcohol, and spent all the next number of years watching his life fall apart until he had what he felt was kind of a bit of a eureka moment. He found that he could, using music as a way of channeling his frustrations, his issues, he was able to kind of heal in an important way. And that coincided, of course, with the development of the folk revival, finding his voice in folk music. But it was a very particular voice because, as a member of the IWW, he found a very particular voice inside the IWW, which had been kind of celebrated. And that's the voice of Joe Hill. So, in spending some time with Utah, and him talking about the change his life had just had undergone since the '60s, and after 2000 or 2001, when he was working with Ani DeFranco, he found his audience going from 50, 60-year-old flannel-wearing truckers to 14-year-old girls with blue hair. And he was kind of struggling at the time with what is it that's tying these things together? What is it that's tying these audiences together? And he realized, and we kind of realized in the conversations that we were having, that perhaps the music that kind of came out of Joe Hill and that lineage maybe doesn't fit so well in folk music. Maybe it fits in some other lineage, in some other history. And that history we're going to suggest is the history of descent. But that's a really complicated history, and one that I'm going to illustrate descent gets taken out of the equation very, very quickly. I'm going to play you a Joe Hill song that was recorded in the 1950s or 1960s in Montreal. The title of it's called Pie in the Sky. The subtitle, The Preacher and the Slave. Joe Hill's a really interesting character. He was an immigrant worker, found himself in Utah, organizing basically labor unrest and strikes. He was a poet, songwriter, poster maker. And in 1915, there was somebody killed in Salt Lake City, and they came knocking on his door. The members of the IW say they came knocking on his door because they've been waiting for a way to shut him up for a long time. And they got picked up and he got brought in front of the magistrate. The magistrate accused him of taking part in the killing or the murder of this union official. Joe Hill wasn't able to defend himself. He was found guilty in a very speedy trial and found himself in front of a firing squad. The executioner, as the guys with the rifles, the executioner turned to Joe Hill and he said, "Mr. Hill, any final words?" And apparently Joe Hill looked at the firing squad thoughtfully and said, "Fire." That story, whether it's true or not, has echoed in the minds of a lot of people trying to find the kind of soul of that protest music that Joe Hill was writing. I want to play this, thinking about this image of Joe Hill, I want to play this interpretation of Joe Hill's song called Pie in the Sky.
Long-haired preachers come out every night, try to tell you what's wrong and what's right. But when asked about something to eat, they will answer in voices so sweet. You will eat by and by, in that glorious land in the sky. Work and pray, live on hay. You get pie in the sky when you die, that's a lie. And the Starvation Army, they play. They sing and they clap and they pray till they get all your coin on the drum. Then they'll tell you when you're on the bum, you will eat by and by in that glorious land of the sky. Work and pray, live on hay. You get pie in the sky when you die, that's a lie.
Now, the lyrical content of the song is definitely provocative. But the kind of the sonic quality of the song undermines the lyrical content. You could very actively listen to it and get what's happening. But if you're just kind of passively listening to the sound world in which those lyrics exist, it undermines the dissent. It undermines the protest in really important ways. So the interpretation of the song, even though the lyrical content of the song speaks to a form of dissent, the music itself, the way the song is interpreted and performed, undermines that. I want to look at another example. The next example is a song called Joe Hill. It was written about 10 years after Joe Hill's execution. It tells a little bit about Joe Hill.
I dreamed I saw Joe Hill last night, alive as you and me. Says I, but Joe, you're 10 years dead. I never died, says he. I never died, says he. In Salt Lake, Joe, my God, says I, am standing by my bed. They framed you on a murder charge, says Joe, but I ain't dead. Says Joe, but I ain't dead. The copper bosses killed you, Joe. They shot you, Joe, says I. Takes more than guns to kill a man, says Joe, I didn't die. Says Joe, I didn't die. And standing there as big as life and smiling with his eyes, Joe says what they forgot to kill went on to organize. Went on to organize. Joe Hill ain't dead, he says to me. Joe Hill ain't never died. We're working men are out on strike. Joe Hill is at their side. Joe Hill is at their side. From San Diego up to Maine and every mine and mill, where workers strike and organize, that's where you'll find Joe Hill. That's where you'll find Joe Hill.
A really lovely song, and it tells a little bit about the story of Joe Hill, but it's innocuous. Like, you listen to it and you go, yay, raw, let's not do anything. It has absolutely none of the kind of sonic qualities that belie the lyrics, right? You're hearing one thing, you're being promoted, you're being provoked to have a sort of response, and again, the response is undermined by the sonic quality completely. Partially, I think, because there's a reflective, nostalgic approach to both the lyrical content and the musicians, and the music and the musicians that happened in the folk revival. There's a disconnect, and part of that disconnect was the lack of recordings that made the music of Joe Hill, as it was performed as a form of protest, made it distant from us. Protests weren't recorded. The field recorders that were going out and scouring the countryside in the 1920s to record folk music weren't interested in protest music or anything to do with the industrial life. They wanted to record country people. That impacted not only music by Joe Hill, it also impacted music by Woody Guthrie. And a great deal of the music that Woody Guthrie recorded was recorded in the studio, but he didn't apparently, by all accounts, he didn't take the studio very